Good evening from Prague. I just arrived at BTC Prague today, or I arrived at Prague, where BTC Prague is going to be. Tomorrow's Dev Hack Day, where there's extreme high level signal from coders, core developers, notch developers. I guess I'll find out. I'm not the technical guy, so that's all way above my head, which is always fun because I do MC one of those rooms there, and it's all way above my pay grade, but it's fun. And then BTC Proc is starting on Thursday, Industry Day, Friday, Saturday is general admission. It is the largest Bitcoin only conference in Europe. No shitcoin here, shitcoin. So it's really great. And I am happy to welcome everyone to Metaplanet Roundtable 3. It's June 17th. The price of Bitcoin, if I check it quickly, that's been going down a little bit the last few hours. Time to buy the dip. We're down at $104,000 per Bitcoin. Maybe Bob's are drumming now. I don't know. I'm super excited and happy to have three really smart people on the show here that have so much signal and have done so much analysis, which is why they've been invited on, so they can help educate us all on Metaplanet as an investment. First off, obviously the one and only climb that ladder, which I think it's funny because I think it was back in April, Climb, that you really did a lot of research and you realized that that Metaplanet had not only the track record was just unreal, it was very steep and fast accumulation of Bitcoin, a phenomenal flywheel, amazing execution. And I like at this point, so I bought Metaplanet the 2nd of May. At this point, just 2 months ago, April, I think anyone who bought Metaplanet in April is like OG Metaplanet shareholder. That's the feeling I'm sitting with. So things are moving so fast, and I think personally it's super exciting. And then my good local friend from Southern California, Blake, who was recently on Stefan Livera, the amazing Bitcoin podcaster, talking about leveraged Bitcoin equities. And then Brian Brookshire, who has several things going for him. First of all, he speaks Danish. That's unique because there's not that many people who can do that, speak and write. So I don't know if I'm overselling it, but you're definitely DMing me some very perfect Danish. So that's awesome. Also, Brian.
A little bit of Danish.
Sorry?
A little bit of Danish.
Right. Also, Brian has lived in Japan, and ever since he joined Metaplanet Roundtable, the first one and the second one, and now the third one, he has had really good insights in terms of how is the culture in Japan. Like the main point that I learned from Brian on that is that in Japan, they do prefer to buy local. So in a situation, I guess, where you have a company that is absolutely killing it, as well as it's Japanese, as well as there's no Bitcoin ETF, as well as you can buy it in NISA accounts that are tax advantageous, then Metaplanet is just selling stock, which I'm sure we're going to talk about, hand over fist at a high MNAV. We are trading MNAV, the multiple to net asset value, around 9.25, I think, right now. And that means it's very accretive selling stock, which is very good for existing shareholders. When I bought the stock 6 weeks ago, whatever it was, Metaplanet had 5,000 Bitcoin. Now they have 10,000. That growth is what attracts investors. It gives a yield. I've seen some posts on X saying, well, Strategy bought 10,000 Bitcoin. It's a full Metaplanet only has 10,000. Why is Metaplanet going up? Well, it's going up because the BTC yield is almost 100% just this quarter, while Strategy's BTC yield is just more than 5%. So people are buying growth. So there's that. Now I spoke a lot, so I will try and sip it there and just hand it over to you first, Climb, and then we'll go around Blake and Brian. Just if there's anything you want to say right off the bat, anything that you find exciting right now in Metaplanet, or whatever you want to share. And then, of course, we have a couple of topics. Climb, how you doing, brother?
I'm great, thank you. Yes, great getting together like this. So I think right now everyone sees they just hit 5 figures. I hit 10,000 Bitcoin. Before this, I basically thought, okay, their growth in Bitcoin holdings is exponential. It's a very, very clean exponential. Anyone who hasn't seen it should check it out. I thought that they would stay on that line and then sort of drop off maybe at the end of the year. I no longer believe that. I currently think that they'll probably sell everything this year for this plan, and they'll actually break out to the upside for kind of the next few months, let's call it, and then taper off at some point after that. So I'm extremely bullish, and I wouldn't rule out 20,000 Bitcoin in July.
It's wild. But I'm on your side. The track record is the second longest in the leveraged Bitcoin equity. They started April last year. Again, things are moving so fast because it's only 1 year and 2 months ago, but they have the second longest track record of the LPs, and they're absolutely destroying it. And the one thing, Climb, you said, which I think is so enticing for all of us, is that line, the BTC yield, is just such a beautiful straight line. It does not look, it's not random at this point. They did how many? 37 Bitcoin purchases, and it's just going up in a straight line. Very nice steep line. Blake, do you have some thoughts on what Climb said there about can they reach 20,000 in July? What do you think about the execution that we're seeing from Metaplanet? What's your expectations?
Yeah, he's always under promise and over delivered in terms of the Bitcoin yield. So that's always great. And what was really exciting for me, of course, is his updated forward guidance about the amount of coins that he's going to get by 2027, which is 210,000 coins, which was just having a CEO, a very conservative Japanese CEO, say that was gave me a lot of confidence, of course. But I think the other thing is the numbers that Climb is suggesting is obviously very, very, very exciting and would suggest a huge allocation to Metaplanet. But I think about it, just almost the stack ranking of all these Bitcoin treasury companies, and Metaplanet has the highest opportunity cost of capital. In other words, I think they're going to continue to perform. And that's kind of the logical way that I think about it. It's like, at least they're going to perform the best. And there's a couple of reasons why, but Climb the Ladder, talks about the actual kind of math behind that, which is exciting. So that's kind of my thought, is just thinking about it more on like the opportunity cost of capital, and Metaplanet's gonna be the best opportunity cost of capital. So that's how I'm thinking about it.
Yeah, it's they definitely are probably the leader right now. If you take execution on track record into account, SWC is much more recent. I think they started in May, maybe April. They've been doing really well, but it's from a much more basis. And the question is, how long can they continue? They probably can continue, but Metaplanet is, you have that insanely nice track record. Brian, good to see you as well. Thank you for being here. How's it going, and what's your current thoughts on Metaplanet?
Sure. I've been seeing the whole, size matters narrative come up again, and I think that it does, but people have it the other way around. So strategy goes out and they buy Metaplanet's entire stack in one day, and that moves their Bitcoin by share by less than 2%. If Metaplanet goes out and buys, let's say, by the end of the year, I don't know how much they're going to buy, but say they buy 50,000 Bitcoin by the end of the year, that 5X their stack. Whereas if strategy goes out and buys 50,000 Bitcoin by the end of the year, that's not even, a 10% addition. So size does matter, and it favors the smaller player, not the larger player, in my opinion. The other thing I think that people are right to talk about is the track record. So, we've got these newer players, Smarter Web Company, and there's a few others that have popped up recently that have done really well. And I think they'll probably continue to do well. But one thing that I'm think people have to watch out for these smaller ones is that there could be the rotation of capital could be pretty swift between them. The volatility is going to be a lot larger. And I think that Metaplanet still exists in this kind of unique space, this unique, almost a growth plus value space that is the way people are looking at it. And so I think it will be less prone to, suffering the kinds of rotations that the smaller plays might see in the short term. But then also still has the growth narrative that I think a strategy will struggle to have through the rest of the year.
Yeah. I mean, I will say, so I didn't sell any strategy to take my Metaplanet position, maybe because I'm kind of, I'm dabbling. It's not like it's,
I still like strategy. I still think it's going to do well. I just
yeah. No,
yeah.
I know. I think the thing that strategy has going for it right now is the MNAV is so compressed, it almost only can go up. And then if they include an S&P 500, that could become really interesting. And if they can get credit ratings on the preferred stocks, they might sell a lot more of that, and that might, increase the yield, which is, I would say, is kind of necessary, because the yield this quarter is 5.5%, and investors prefer. If we should take Metaplanet, it's 87%. It's just more attractive. Like, you can't beat around the bush on that. Why don't we take a look, Climb, on the and shout out to Vince and Climb. You're doing the Metaplanet Dojo. I think it's every Monday at, is it 9 a.m. PST, or when are you doing it, Climb?
It's actually always a surprise. It's been Sunday night in the U.S.
Okay.
And we haven't announced when the next one is. It's just really when there's enough to go on is kind of when we're trying to do them.
Yeah, and for me, it's very unusual that I actually now doing a show that is the same time every week, which is, so this Metaplanet Roundtable, of which this is the third, is Tuesday 9 a.m. PST so far, and I hope so next Tuesday as well. Where my MSTR Monday show often is not on a Monday. But there you go. Let's take a look. So shout out to Vince and you, Climb, for your Metaplanet Dojo. Is also a must watch, I would say, with a lot of your analysis and models and number crunching. So let's take a look at one of the slides that you shared Sunday evening US time. I guess I'm in Europe now, so I saw it Monday. But do you want to add some? Can you put us some commentary on this, and then we can take it around the room here and discuss it?
Yeah. So models like this, take a while to develop, and there's a million different ways to do it. And I know that people could critique these models until the end of time, and rightly so. Like, no model's ever going to get it perfectly. This model suggests that things are going to break out to the upside on their exponential growth of their Bitcoin holdings. And the reason why I think that is because they sold 101 million shares to the market, almost half of their 210 million plan that they finished in, I think, May 19th. They sold that in 11 consecutive trading days, and the stock went up against all that selling pressure. So that's over 100 million shares. Right now, they have a plan for 555 million shares, and that plan officially starts the 24th. But Evo Fund, the partner that they have that's essentially selling the shares for them in a roundabout way, they've already sold like 5% of that plan, like 26 million plus shares, maybe 30 million at this point. So they're already in it, even though it hasn't really started yet. And to bypass the model and just think about the math, 500 and something million shares times, let's just call it $10 a share. Even if they got today's price for all of those, which wouldn't make sense because along the way they'll get yield, and that bakes in, and I would expect the price to go higher, most likely. But even if you accept $10, that turns into about $5 billion of raised capital that would go to buy, roughly 50,000 Bitcoin. So if they just could sell them all for today's price, or less than today's price, $10, they would end the year at around 60,000 Bitcoin. So I don't really see it being that low. And they might finish this plan in October or even November. But I'm just kind of calling it the end of the year. And if you scale the numbers higher, you could get to six figures Bitcoin fairly easily this year.
Six figure.
Yeah, for the count. Yeah. So like over 100,000.
Yeah, and I must say, based on the assumptions between these four different strong bull, base, and bear, I'm gonna go with the strong bull. So maybe we can you can just quickly explain. So there's two components, right, in these that defines what type of bull bear case it is. It's the MNAV and then the price per Bitcoin. Do you want to just take us through strong bull?
Yes. So, and the price for Bitcoin, of course, comes into play with the price predictions for the stock, but it doesn't directly matter for their accumulation, which is kind of neat because it simplifies the math a lot. So all that really matters is the MNAV, and then the volume and the company's ability to sell shares, to raise capital at that premium, essentially. And then it's all just relative to Bitcoin price. But so yeah, the super bull case has the MNAV starting at 6 and dropping every single day until it ends up at the end of the plan, at the end of the year, let's call it, at 4.
Mm-hmm.
The bull is going from 6 to 3. The base is 5 to 3.5, and the bear is 4 to 2.5.
Mm-hmm. So
I consider those pretty conservative. And of course, like I said, they've already sold almost 5% of the shares, or I think more than 5% of the shares.
Yeah.
At slightly over a 6 MNAV as far as like what they'll capture for those shares.
Right. And from what you're saying there, I must say I'm on team strong bull. I think that's the most realistic scenario, to be honest. But don't you also have a price of Bitcoin within as part of the assumption there? It's not only MNAV, right? We're also talking about a price per Bitcoin by the end of the year for these.
Yes. So the Super Bowl and the bull, I just put both of those at 200,000. And then the base, I have the base case being 125,000 at the end of the year, and the bear case being 100,000. But those are just straight ratios. So if anyone, when we look at the price stuff later, just ratio it out to whatever price you think Bitcoin would go to, if you agree with any of the other assumptions here.
Yeah. So and we're gonna go to you, Blake and Brian, on I want to hear your thoughts on this. But before we do, I just want to say, so as you can see, before these very nice lines, that line that is ticking up, that's the actual history. And as we spoke about before, it's such a beautiful straight line on a log chart, just very phenomenal execution and very bullish, and the second longest track record in the space. And I think what's mind-blowing is we're in June, and with these not completely out of the realm of possibility assumptions, Metaplanet could actually go from 10,000 to 200,000 Bitcoin this year, like over the next 6.5 months. I think that's mind-blowing. Blake, what is your thoughts? How am I too bullish? What do you think there, brother?
Yeah, I think this is great. I think the past performance is kind of the best indicator of future performance. So that gives me confidence with Metaplanet having some of that past performance and kind of continuing that trend. I think it's, as we're trying to understand these Bitcoin treasury companies, and Metaplanet being the obvious one, like I think it's interesting to understand what is generating that MNAV or that Bitcoin yield in general. Like, why are people buying it? Why is it higher than MicroStrategy? And so I think that's interesting to think through, because then that will give you a better clarity in terms of what type of yield we're going to be able to generate and why. Will it increase? Will it decrease? And that type of thing. So I like to think about that, but this model is very exciting. So we'll probably dive into that a little bit further on the call.
So you are down with something like them going from 10,000 to 100 or even more thousand Bitcoin for this year, 6.5 months from now, is very much within the realm of possibilities.
Yeah, definitely, because these systems are positive feedback loops where there's a flywheel that's going on, where the higher the price creates more demand and more interest, allows them a lower debt ratio, and Metaplanet is just a machine with relatively low debt compared to other Bitcoin treasury companies and a higher stacking rate. So the kind of question there is like, why is that happening? Why are they able to do such high numbers with a lot of the similar tools that MicroStrategy has and some of these other companies as well? So it's interesting to start to think through what attributes allow these numbers to be the strong bull case or the more base case. But yeah, no, these are in line with kind of what I was thinking as well.
Yeah, so we seem to be on the same side there. Brian, what's your thoughts on what's realistic for the year?
Yeah, I look at this and I think, yes, that range of outcomes is possible. Yeah, the error bars are so wide depending on what happens in the market between now and the end of the year. If Bitcoin has a down period, it could slow the growth. If we have the Bitcoin bull run that everybody's expecting, then the growth could accelerate much more quickly. And it's hard for me to say I think it's going to be exactly this number at the end of the year, because it really depends what's happening in the market between now and then. But in terms of range of outcomes, Climb's chart looks very plausible to me. The other thing that I would say is that volume, I think people are still underestimating or not fully appreciating just how much volume this company has. I saw a stats posted the other day that on a share basis, there have been days where Metaplanet has higher trading volume than Strategy even. Not on a dollar basis, of course, but on a share basis. So if that keeps up, then yeah, sky's the limit here.
Yeah, and I was gonna say it's mind blowing, and I'm leaning to over 100,000 for the end of the year. We'll have to see, and just we have to remember that because the MNAV is so high, which it is for several reasons, then it's just so accretive when they sell these 555 million shares, which is the current plan they're under. It's just so accretive that they end up buying so much Bitcoin, and it's not very dilutive, so it's just extremely positive for the share price, and that's the name of the game for Metaplanet right now. It is just a hyper growth leverage Bitcoin equity, both in terms of the Bitcoin they're putting on the balance sheet, but so far we're also seeing that in the stock price, and I think it will continue. And actually, Climb, one of the things I noticed you said on the Sunday show is, and I love hearing it, because I know you want to be conservative. You don't want people to get too excited, but you still think that they're going to go into a faster growth spurt before maybe later coming back to current growth rate. Do you want to just comment a little bit on that?
Yeah, they're getting more efficient. I call it speed running Marios. They're kind of speed running Mario right now. They saw Strategy make the game, and now they took notes. And this 555 plan is designed to be more efficient from the start, with them being able to have Evo borrow 30 million shares to short to the market to essentially start the game early, start before June 24th. So June 24th happens, Evo Fund, which is their partner that sells the shares, they'll immediately hand Metaplanet the cash that was raised June 9th, 10th, and 11th, 3 consecutive days where they sold almost 30 million shares to the market. So, that's already a done deal, which is really neat. And, the volume has picked up with price, which normally doesn't happen. Typically, you might see high volume and then price goes up, and in dollar terms, it might stay the same or even go up, the volume. But in shares traded as a percentage of total shares, you'll actually kind of see that, drift down. And with Metaplanet, we're not seeing that right now. And most of the volume is still, on the Tokyo Stock Exchange. All the new U.S. investors, a lot of them are buying MTPLF, and there's volume there. But a lot of it's still really organic within Japan. And yeah, I mean, they've been the number one. I think June 3rd, maybe they were actually the number one in shares and dollars trade, or yen value traded out of all Japanese companies. So they're having more frequent days like that. So yeah, I couldn't be more excited. I think when you try to cram 555 million share sale into 6 months, there's almost no way to model that out without them exceeding their historic exponential growth of Bitcoin. And I think, Bitcoin per share curve is going to look very similar. I need to kind of graph that out too. but yeah, we'll slow after, you can't have 200,000 Bitcoin and still 10x your Bitcoin per share in 2 years or in 5 years. But right now they can do it, and I think they'll do it before the end of the year. And the MNAV is trading for less than 10, and I think they can 10x or more their Bitcoin per share by the end of the year.
Right. And yeah, I agree. They'll more than 10x. We'll go above 100,000. And thank you for making this model. It's mind blowing, but it just confirms how bullish this is. I mean, when I bought it six weeks ago or so, they had 5,000 Bitcoin. Now they have 10,000. So that's a doubling in 6 weeks. It's going fast. It's going incredibly fast. I do want to move on to the next slide, but before we do that, if there's any of you that have anything more you want to add to this slide, and then actually I have a question also, but let me just first hear if any of you have anything you want to add to this slide. Nope. We good? Then, well, let me take this little pause to just remind everyone that this is not at all financial advice. It is financial entertainment and maybe some education and information. So you got to do your own research, and you are fully responsible yourself for your financial decisions. We talk about this because we're super excited about a stock that is going absolutely bonkers in a straight line. It's just fun. What can I say? But actually, before we move on to the next slide that I want to share, so we're looking right now at a scenario where we may all agree that Metaplanet will end up with between 100 and 200,000 Bitcoin by the end of the year. Simon, the CEO of Metaplanet, said that the long-term goal is to reach 210,000 Bitcoin. We all know, as they kind of have hinted themselves, that they put conservative targets that they expect to blow away. You don't want to overpromise and underdeliver, and they keep blowing away their own targets. So looking out, say, 10 years, I mean, this is bonkers growth rate. Because this is relevant for the next slide. Where do you think realistically Metaplanet could end up with? How many Bitcoin on their balance sheet? Be conservative, be realistic, whatever you like, climb. How many Bitcoin do you think realistically they can accumulate by 2035?
I spend a lot of time, and increasingly more time, trying to envision what the future looks like for Bitcoin, with companies swallowing them up. I mean, if you think about all the new tickers that are growing their Bitcoin every day, announcing that they doubled it, from 50 Bitcoin to 100 or whatever it is, like, those are small, but they're still each like buying a certain number of Bitcoin per day. And I mean, it's all averages up to way more. Even what just Strategy does is way more than the supply of 450 per day. If they're buying 10,000 a week, that's squashing that, right? So like at some point, I don't know what the end game looks like, and that I don't want to be surprised by that. So hopefully I can kind of narrow down the potential outcomes for that. I think that it becomes a very different story at some point. I think that Metaplanet becomes much more like Strategy's. It's already Strategy's younger brother, but like it's going to be grown up. It's like it's moving into adulthood now. Certainly, once they have 1% of all Bitcoin, those may be the only two companies that ever accomplish that. That's really hard to say. And the sweet spot of where they may land in the next 10 years. I mean, I'll call it 500,000 to 1 million Bitcoin, just because it's really hard to predict that any company could have substantially more than 1 million Bitcoin. Strategy, it's kind of within arm's reach. Maybe Metaplanet has a shot of going over 1 million, but it just really depends on how much is out there and what the competition looks like.
So like a final number of Bitcoin. Can I push you to say something there? Did I?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think they'll cross over 500,000. And if I,
Me too.
if I knew tomorrow I was scheduled to go in a coma for 10 years and wake up and I had to guess today how many Bitcoin they would have, I would guess, 900,000. Let's just call it 900.
I love it, and I actually think that you could be close to getting that right, and that is mind blowing because it's 90 times as much Bitcoin as they have now, which will not happen for strategy. It's just physically not possible. Blake, if we did the coma thing, 10 years you wake up, what is the most likely amount of Bitcoin that Metaplanet have on their balance sheet?
That's a good question, and I don't know. I'd refer to Climb's models on that, but going back to just the opportunity cost of capital, that gives me confidence that they're going to continue to have the highest Bitcoin yield for the longest amount of time, because they can leverage that economy, the Japanese economy, to just take all that debt and equity returns and demand and put that into Bitcoin. Why that's different than like Brazil and the United States is like our debt is getting around 5-6% yield. In Japan, they're getting sub 1%, and their equity market hasn't had a return in like 50 years. And that's not even adjusting for inflation. So what that is suggesting to me is that all that demand wants to find its way into Metaplanet, into Bitcoin through Metaplanet. And Metaplanet just has to use the financial tools to do that, which means that all that money is going to be running in. It's going to be the first major domino to fall in terms of a hyper Bitcoinized economy. And again, that's going to go into Metaplanet. And so that to me is kind of the most exciting, and will allow Metaplanet to continue to be the fastest horse in this race for the foreseeable future. While some of these other Bitcoin treasury companies, they might have starting from 50 to 100 in a quick double in a week, but what is that in terms of sustainability and why? And so going back to being in a coma for 10 years, Metaplanet's got to work through that, $10 trillion economy plus to bring that into Bitcoin. And I think they can do that. So it's an interesting thought experiment. I know Simon has said that, they're going to, the Japanese economy is going to, the debt market is going to chew off their own arm to get some yield from Metaplanet in terms of once they start to launch a fixed income product. And I think that, simply explains it very well. Like they don't get any yield in their fixed income product. So as soon as he starts to start that engine up, all those, kind of trillions of dollars will start to come in, and he'll be able to leverage that as a tool as well. In addition to the retail investors being extremely hungry for equity yield, which they're finally getting for the first time. So, that's kind of how I'm thinking about it. So I don't have a specific number, but again, my thought is it's going to be the best performing Bitcoin treasury company for a decade for that reason.
That's a pretty a bold statement, but I tend to think that you're right, because there are some unique they are in a unique situation in Japan, is what I want to say, where there are some advantages for them that are not necessarily all there for other companies. So it's pretty it's looking good. Let's put it that way. Brian, what's your thoughts here? Are we being too bullish? 2035, Climb saying 900,000.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if I could make a prediction with any degree of credibility over that time frame, but high 100,000s, that sounds plausible to me. And I think the way I would think about it is what conditions would need to be present to lead to that. Because right now, effectively, what they're doing is running an ATM. And, they're doing some things with bonds to pull the future forward a little bit, as Klein puts it. But I don't think that strategy will last forever. At some point, they will need to do other things. Blake's point, the preferred market could become pivotal. One of the things that we need to watch very closely over the next year is how the preferred market plays out for strategy, and whether or not we get institutional acceptance of those products. Because if Metaplanet keeps speedrunning Mario here, then a year or two from now they might be in a position where that is the next logical place to go and start raising capital. And if that kind of next stage of the rocket needs to be prepared and ready to go to continue the growth.
Yeah, well, that is very fair, and you can't go wrong if you don't give a target. But I'll probably just end up going with Climb. I think that it sounds really nice, but having to be bullish, I'll just say, all right, they'll reach 1 million, 2035. Let's go. But the reason I wanted to talk about that, and I think is really, really important, because that, I think, plays into the long-term evaluation of these companies, and I believe our ability to evaluate whether they are attractive to invest in at the current price or not. And Tom Jones earlier in the chat was asking about, well, what about the end game? What when let's say fiat dies and you can't run you can't sell stock for fiat currency and buy Bitcoin. And in that scenario, what I'm seeing, we just crossed 2,000 live viewers. Thank you everyone for watching. In that scenario, where was I? I shouldn't have started talking about the audience, but anyways, thank you for watching.
You want me to continue your thought?
Yeah, well, just tell me where it was. There was a point.
Yeah, you were just talking about how long this can continue. Someone asked how long this continues.
Yeah. So once fiat dies and you can, run the flywheel this way, I personally believe, and I'm trying to hammer this home, that these companies will be valued at how much Bitcoin they have in the balance sheet, plus a premium for the value of their operations. Let's say Metaplanet ends up with 900,000 Bitcoin. They'll be able to use that as collateral, as a bank, etc., and generate an income. And who knows what they're going to be able to generate as income. Let's say randomly they'll be able to earn 50,000 Bitcoin per year. Then their market cap will be 900,000 Bitcoin, because that's what they have, plus whatever the market think should be the value of an entity that can generate 50,000 Bitcoin, if you follow me on that one. Now, the reason I wanted to talk about that is because I want to have a look at this real quick. So let me see if I can make it a little bit bigger. There we go. So here we got Strategy, Metaplanet, and the blockchain group. I want to focus just on Metaplanet for now, really in this show. But we know, as we can see there at the bottom of the Metaplanet square, that they hold 10,000 Bitcoin. Their MNAV, and these numbers may not be 100% exact and correct, but it's ballpark correct. Is the MNAV is 9.25. What does that mean? That means that Metaplanet right now has a market cap of 92,000 Bitcoin, roughly, ballpark. Now, I believe that Climb very much could be right, that they'll reach to 900,000. So buying the company at a market cap of only 92,000 Bitcoin is ridiculously cheap. But also, when you see Simon's own conservative target that they're gonna blow away because they under promise and over deliver, he's saying they believe they can reach 210,000 Bitcoin, and all of us believe they can probably reach more than 500,000, if not closer to 1 million. So buying the company priced at only 92,000 Bitcoin, to me, is a steal. What is your thoughts, guys, on that? You like that way of looking at it? You don't like it?
Well, I would say, I don't know if I'd say it's a steal, but if you think that's what it could be by the end of the year, then certainly fair value.
Right. What about you, Blake?
Yeah, I think one of the factors is understanding the amount of months it takes for that yield to be paid, the premium to be paid off with the Bitcoin yield helps benchmark things. Mm-hmm. But again, markets are forward looking. So if things tend to slow down, like with MicroStrategy might be an example, and the yields are slowing down, and we have to understand, are the yields going to continue, and are they going to increase? And that gives you the understanding of forward looking into the future. Is this yield going to continue, increase, decrease? Why and why not? And then you can get an understanding of it's overvalued or undervalued. And kind of talking about that a little bit further is where you get that overvalued aspect, instead of just looking hindsight about their yield in the past and what the forward guidance is. So, but the amount of months it takes to erase that premium, which I think is, I'm going to say 18 months from memory. Doesn't sound bad to me when I start to think through how much demand the Japanese market has in comparison to some of these other companies for, again, the long term, if I had to rest on one company for 10 years or 5 years.
Right. Thank you for that, Blake. What about you, Climb? You think it's a fair way of looking at it, saying that the company essentially right now, when your MNAV is 9.25 and they have 10,000 Bitcoin, it means that the market cap is around 92,000 Bitcoin. And since we believe that they'll end up holding a lot more, plus being able to generate a revenue, in my opinion, is cheap. But your thoughts on that?
Yeah. I try as much as possible to look at Bitcoin per share, just because it's harder to look at that. It's harder to get the numbers because you have to know the historic daily share count. And then, do you want to look at outstanding shares or fully diluted or whatever? It gets a little messier. But something that I actually just kind of thought of, I haven't thought about it this cleanly before, I guess, but if something's trading at, and their website says like a 7.5 MNAV. So I'm not sure if one includes debt and one doesn't or whatever. But if something's trading at, let's call it a 9, if something's trading at a 9 MNAV, the question is that 9 times their future, let's say way off into the future, if they're trading at 1 MNAV? Well, Strategy has almost 600,000 Bitcoin, and Strategy hasn't had very clean growth. They've paved the way for everybody else, but like they've, through trial and error, had to figure all this stuff out. And Metaplanet has a lot of regional advantages. So I think when people are looking at like the months to cover MNAV or, the premium to sort of future net asset value sort of idea, if for me, the floor of MNAV, and, people could argue what the floor is all day, but to me, it's something like a 2 for Metaplanet, at the time that they're the size of Strategy with, let's call it 600,000 Bitcoin. And so if I see that as sort of like a decent floor in my head, then 9 MNAV is really just a 4.5 times their future floor.
Right.
So the math gets a lot different, if you think about that. So
yeah. But I think even though, pardon me, even though we may have a little bit different sort of ways of looking at it, it sounds like we're all in agreement with it being having a very positive outlook and being a great time to be owning this stock. Again, not financial advice, and who knows, we may be wrong, but we're loving it. I think we can say that. Yeah, go ahead.
An interesting thing, it's tough to discuss the MNAV as well because there's a game theory on top of that. In other words, like the CEOs have the ability to crush the MNAV if they wanted to. If they wanted to sell as much stock as they wanted to and bring it down to 1, that'd be within their ability. And they'd also have the ability to increase it to 10 or 20 by not doing any of those things. So it is interesting to think about how it would be used, and Sailor and MicroStrategy keep it around that 2 MNAV premium, while Metaplanet's doing closer to 7, 8, 9, keeping it in that channel. But I think it's interesting to think about that or even discuss it, because if the MNAV is high, then that is a future yield for the company. In other words, they sell the ATM, they sell some shares, and that generates a higher yield for them. So in a way, like it's bad on one point where the MNAV is high, where you're like, oh, I'm paying a premium, but then also that's a tool that the CEO is going to be able to use, or the company is going to be able to use to generate a higher yield, and that's good. So it's tough, like chicken or the egg type of thought process sometimes. And so it's good to think about the higher MNAV in terms of being able to generate more yield, and that's why the yield is so important to get back to. And people, especially Bitcoiners, as they're thinking about this, tend to operate on too much over the MNAV is the metric that you want to measure in terms of when to get in and whatnot. They're still thinking about it as a closed-end GBTC trust, and they're waiting for the MNAV to drop to 0.9 or 10% under the asset. And that's just not going to happen because markets are forward-looking, and and they want to capture that high Bitcoin yield. And so I think that's just good to keep in mind as people are trying to evaluate these things.
You got it. And since you're talking about the yields, I do want to just bring back the looking at the three of, I guess, the most successful leveraged Bitcoin equities, aka BTC Treasuries, that not only are holding Bitcoin on the balance sheet, but are very actively working on accruing more Bitcoin per share, which is what we all find interesting here. But if we look here, if you take a fourth from the bottom on each of the Strategy, Metaplanet, and the Blockchain Group, you'll see that Strategy has had a quarter-to-date yield of 5.5%. Metaplanet has a mind-blowing 87% BTC yield quarter-to-date. So in just 2.5 months, they have almost double the Bitcoin per share, and I guess it's not unrealistic that they'll go about 100 for that. We got 2 more weeks to go, and a lot is happening over at Metaplanet. And then the Blockchain Group has a very nice, pretty much 48% BTC yield. Is that along the lines of? Well, what's your thoughts on that, Blake? When, as you're very rightly saying, in my opinion, that the yield is so important, it is just they're killing it. The yield is super high, and it's with a second longest track record in the space. So it's muted. Yeah.
I think going back to one of the audience's questions about, what's going to happen after hyper Bitcoinization, or what's the next step with these particular company. I think people need to keep in mind as they're investing in these companies that this is a gold rush land grab, and the goal is to get more Bitcoin, and then we can figure out what to do with that Bitcoin later on. So creating an insurance company, creating a bank, and I think it's very interesting because those are very, I hate to say it, but simple models that have been proven out through history. So once you have the capital, you can choose to become a bank, you can choose to become an insurance company, you can use the different tools, and you're just doing basic, finance or business practices on top of the Bitcoin in the future. So that's my thought there. I don't know if anyone else has any other thoughts.
Yep. Yeah, you got it, Brian.
A related note there. When you're thinking about what terminal MNAV could be, I think it really depends what you think the end state of the business looks like. And if the end state of the business it looks something more like a commercial bank does today, someone correct me if I'm wrong on this, but I think commercial banks tend to trade at a price to book of something of like, 2. So, that dovetails with thinking that, terminal MNAV could be somewhere in the 2x range. And, the thing I'd say is that, people hear, oh, they're going to become a bank. And some people think, oh, that sounds totally natural. They've got all the Bitcoin. Why wouldn't they? And then other people think, well, what sense does that make that a software company is going to become a bank? And, if you think about historically, I think it was actually goldsmiths that wound up being some of the first banks just because they had all the gold, or at least, that's what you read anyway. So, I think the companies that can become banks later can come from companies that are from unsurprising sectors today. So it's, even though it might sound a little bit far-fetched, it's still within the realm of possibility. And, those are some ways it could play out.
Absolutely. And it's that very much fall along the lines of like basically saying we don't know exactly how this is going to play out. And Strategy started buying Bitcoin in 2020, but it wasn't really until just last year, after 4 years of doing that he really narrowed down the whole playbook and the preferred stocks and the convertible bonds and all that. It took 4 years kind of to get really clear how he built this machine to just accumulate more Bitcoin per stock. And I always said, why would I invest in anything else but Bitcoin? Why would I hold anything else but Bitcoin? Because how are you going to beat Bitcoin? Well, leveraged Bitcoin equities have the ability to accumulate more Bitcoin per share. Hence, my ownership of Bitcoin goes up. Yes, it's through a third party, it's through a company, and of course, it's the pros and cons and all of that. But I personally do like to own something that goes up at this speed. It's very tempting and very hard not to. And I don't see any good reason not to. I mean, another thing about Metaplanet is the fact that they're showing the proof of reserves, which is, it's funny. Like, the reason I'm bringing some of this up, the two first guys I spoke with when I arrived in Prague today for BTC Prague were like, but isn't it, hope it's not Ponzi, can we trust them? And I'm like, guys, none of the Bitcoin of these companies so far, at least we're talking Strategy, Metaplanet, Blockchain Group, none of the Bitcoin have been put down or are put up as collateral. They're not at a risk of being stopped out. Like, it is currently set up in what I consider, and I could be wrong, so don't buy it because I'm saying it, but the way I look at it, I think it seems very safe. There's no, in terms of, of course, there's the third, custodial, the custody of the Bitcoin, but they're not at a risk of being stopped out, which I would say is probably the biggest risk. Blake, you look like you want to say something.
Yeah, I think that's, a great point, because, I don't like to call these leveraged Bitcoin equities just because of the leverage sounds scary. I mean, Metaplanet has, I think, let's say 10% debt on their balance sheet, right? And so I like to think of that more as a mechanical engineered engine to bring in Bitcoin into the system. And the analogy that I think is resonating with some of my Bitcoiner friends is that, imagine a real estate developer that's got 10 houses, and those houses are in a location that's appreciating at 60% a year, which is the Bitcoin. And then you've got a company that's doubling the houses every 60 days, and they're only got 10% debt, for the system, for the real estate development company. And so that doesn't sound risky to me, because in the United States, a lot of people are used to putting down 80% of the value of the home. So, if you've got $1 million home, that's $800,000, and that's a little bit more risky. Then you factor in all the things that they can do in terms of selling equity, puts, issuing, fixed income products and things of that nature. And it becomes, much less risky. And then in addition to that, let's go through the worst case scenario that they have to sell their Bitcoin or their real estate, in this analogy, to buy or to pay off the debt. They've doubled their stack so many times in a year period that even if you knew that was going to happen, I would still sign up. So it's like, especially if the MNAV is 1, you're like, okay, so let me get this straight. They're going to, 4x or 10x their Bitcoin stack. I'm going to be a part of that. And then at the end of the year, they're going to have to sell 10% of their Bitcoin stack to pay off the debt. Even if that was the plan, I think that's fine. Let alone it's not held mark to market. And therefore they can just wait out a bear market for 2 years, and the engine just doesn't break. It just slows down or stops in a worst case scenario. So that's what I think about that.
I like that. Guys, Climb, Brian, anything you want to add to that? Or I will.
Yeah, I mostly agree. I have a slightly different. I think the leverage part is key to it, but I think that also explaining is key, because in my mind, the most attractive feature of the Bitcoin Treasury companies is the long-term arbitrage on the rate of return of Bitcoin and interest rates. So to me, like, the leverage component is very, very vital to the whole strategy. But yeah, it definitely needs explained that these companies are not actually that levered. If you go out and you buy a house, you put 20% down, you've got 500% leverage. These companies have 10 to 20% leverage. It's a completely different scenario. It's
actually a great point, and thanks for bringing it up, Blake, and reminding us of that. I guess the term leveraged Bitcoin equity kind of started being used last year, and has been
fine. Just people say it's a leveraged company and it's very dangerous. You're like, okay, well, hold on, and then going back to Brian's comparison.
But if it's leverage in a responsible, not putting the Bitcoin for collateral kind of way, I'd rather just call a spade a spade. Also, I don't mind if it could, but I don't know. Anyways, but that it came about that term when Strategy kind of was the exciting horse. They're still an exciting company and have a great future and everything, obviously. But last year, where that has been their main lever, is to lever up, buy Bitcoin, and then it's a levered move. While Metaplanet, such a great point. Thanks for bringing it up. Blake, really it's a matter of, well, they just have a high MNAV and they're selling stock significantly more expensive than the Bitcoin that is backing them. So let me make an example, which I have before been told that helps people understand how it works with the MNAV. So right now, every time there is $1 worth of Bitcoin, then Metaplanet stock trades at $9. So when they go out and sell a new stock at $9, granted it's at $12 right now, but this is an example for the MNAV, which is around 9. So for that $1 worth of Bitcoin, the stock is $9. So when they go out and sell new stock at $9, the first $1 from that share sell will buy Bitcoin. Now, the new stock and all the previous stocks all have 1 Bitcoin behind each stock. But what happens is the $8 from the $1 being spent on Bitcoin up to the $9 the share is sold for, that $8, they also buy Bitcoin for that. Net split out, essentially spread out on all the shares, both new and old. And that's why they can generate such a BTC yield, aka growth in Bitcoin per stock. It's phenomenal. I love it. Let's go. Climb, any thoughts on that?
Yeah, just to, continue what you're saying, like that's why all of my models have MNAV kind of starting, where it is or lower, and then finishing considerably lower. And that's part of how I answer the whole, is it a Ponzi sort of question. Is you can look at the 1 MNAV price in my models, and it's constantly going up. Mm-hmm. And you can look at, and that in itself helps enough people anyway understand it. And then also just, lower the, like what would be the cleanest way to make everybody happy with the growth of a company like this is, you don't want to be at infinite MNAV, because you can't arbitrage all that, because there's not infinite Bitcoin that you can buy. So, price would get crushed if it went from like 1,000 MNAV, and if they could never multiply their Bitcoin per share by 1,000, then okay, it's probably not going to be great. If you have a reasonable MNAV, and in Metaplanet's case, historically that's been like between around a 3 and a 10. That's really a sweet spot for me at this stage in their growth, where they can still 10x their Bitcoin per share. At the point where they have 200,000 Bitcoin, and it's either impossible or not very likely for them to be able to 10x their Bitcoin per share anymore, at least in any, like less than a decade or something like that, then, I would prefer them trade at like a 2.5 or 3 MNAV or a 2. It would be great if they could consistently trade at like a 5, but I'm not sure how that would work, because they would trade at a premium that they couldn't fully arbitrage. And how does that end up? There's only 21 million Bitcoin. And so I don't really see that as very likely either. So I kind of get stuck there.
And I guess that's also why that your models, even for this year, all have a declining MNAV. Blake.
Yeah, no, it's interesting to think about the kind of tail end that Climb is talking about, like what happens towards the end. And I think it's obviously we were a fixed amount of 21 million Bitcoin, but the give is going to be the price. And the interesting thing about this Bitcoin treasury companies is they're attacking the largest capital pools in the world, $350 trillion of fixed income, and the equity markets at the same time. So what is going to start to happen is that we have, say 19 million coins on the market. And as these coins go into hodlers of last resort hands, MicroStrategy, Metaplanet, hardcore Bitcoiners, they're not getting sold. And so that 350 trillion has to find its way into like 500,000 coins, 50,000 coins, that type of thing. So the price is always going to increase. But the thing that's exciting about these Bitcoin treasury companies, as long as there's debt to be able to move into the system, they're just going to be able to ratchet that price up. And because the MNAV is at a premium to their assets or the Bitcoin, that means that they always get a discount. So there's always that incentive for them to do that. And so in that sense, they don't care if the price is 100 or 200,000 or 5 million, as long as their MNAV is much higher than the Bitcoin price, or that's their discount or the premium over the assets. And so, in a lot of ways, it'll slow down the amount of Bitcoin that it can accumulate, but they'll always, again, have the highest opportunity cost of capital, or being able to kind of generate a relatively high yield compared to other companies and other business models, if that makes sense.
No, absolutely. So we have one more slide here from Climb, the show that you did with Vince Sunday, and I want to share that because that is looking at price predictions for the year based on the scenarios that we spoke about earlier. If Climb, if you want to just, well, in this one actually, you are writing the two factors that goes into this, and that is the Bitcoin price and the MNAV movement. Do you want to just take us through that and explain a little bit?
Yeah, so this is the y-axis is the price in log base 10, or sorry, log base 2 there. So, but anyway, it's an exponential chart, and you can see the historic price there and kind of how messy it is. What I would like to do with this and the other one, by the way, I was thinking about this the other day, is just as the next weeks and months progress, I kind of want to put the price and their Bitcoin holdings on top of this model kind of unchanged, just to see like which direction we end up kind of going. Do we land between the base and the bull, or how does that go? If one reason I like Metaplanet so much, I mean, there's tons of reasons. Obviously, I came out with like 42 reasons or something recently, but one reason I like them so much, I lost my train of thought there.
Welcome in the club.
Yeah, not enough coffee. But
yeah.
Is that you don't need Bitcoin to go up this year for them to succeed. So yes, you need Bitcoin to work. You need Bitcoin to go up in value, as that's overall the arbitrage is Bitcoin versus fiat. Sort of, if you zoom out all the way, right? That's the arbitrage. But on a single year basis or something like that, if it just acts like a stable coin and stays at 105,000 for the rest of the year, that's not a problem. So, my super bull and bull case, I have the year ending with, 200,000 Bitcoin price. But if we end the year at 100,000 and the other, like if the MNAV numbers still come true that I have here, then just scale down my price estimate. So $100,000 per Bitcoin instead of 200,000 would bring the super bull and the bull case, just cut that in half, So, I mean, that would still be, $70 or $58 or whatever there at the end of the year, at the end of the plan. Yeah. So, and of course it's not going to look that clean. It's going to be choppy. But that sort of MNAV volatility is also really valuable for them to take advantage of.
Right. So what we're seeing basically is, like, personally, I do believe Bitcoin can reach 200,000, and I do believe it's realistic with an MNAV of 4. That's the Super Bowl. I'm probably too optimistic, but it's obviously interesting as a shareholder owning a stock that is priced about, what is it right now? I'll find out. I think it's about $12.50. That the price target, and we're not talking about 5 years from now. This is the price target for the end of the year. Somewhere between maybe $100 and $150. That's a lot of value growth in just 6.5 months. Blake and Brian, what are you guys' thoughts on this bullish model?
Had myself muted there. I think this is a really good point to consider, that the fact that they're able to increase Bitcoin per share even while Bitcoin is not going up. Because even as bullish as I am on Bitcoin this year, you always have to think about what if it doesn't go up 50 to 100% this year? What if it just stays flat? Do you have something? Definitely not investment advice, but do you have something in your bag that is going to perform under those conditions? And that is one reason why I really like some of the younger Bitcoin companies, and Metaplanet in particular, because I think strategy is much more dependent on the Bitcoin price than I think some of these newer companies are. And so to me, that's a very attractive feature of them.
Yeah. Blake.
Yeah, and it is interesting to think about how the dynamics of the 4-year cycle or the bear market might be a little bit different. And previously, I think in the Bitcoin ecosystem, it was, I guess, very raw, where the news cycle would get more attention and more people would pile in, and you'd have people kind of orange pill or get it all of a sudden, and then they'd put a lot of money in or put some money in, and then that attention cycle would die, and then the price would die because of the coins being issued would be increasing. That's what kind of created the 4-year cycle. But I think with these Bitcoin treasury companies, there's a good argument that this is changing, because these Bitcoin treasury companies are plugging into the demand of these equity markets, as well as the debt markets with the fixed income product. In other words, like if Metaplanet can offer a 3% yield, that's like 6x what these fixed income investors are getting right now, right? And then the same thing with the returns of Metaplanet in general, where the whole stock market in Japan has been flat. It had a huge dip and is kind of reaching its all-time highs 50 years adjusted. Like, in other words, it's finally hitting an all-time high after 50 years. And that's not even measured for inflation. And so Metaplanet just looks like an absolute rock star that anyone would want to be a part of, even in a bear market. And I think that's kind of changing the dynamics there, if that makes sense. So again, going back to Metaplanet, they're able to offer, MicroStrategy, or Michael Saylor, I think, said it in an interview, where, the yield in the United States is around 5%, and he's offering a 10% fixed income product, Stride, around there. But in Japan, they're sub 1% yield. So that's 20 times the yield that they're getting, right? And that's a huge magnitude more, that when or if Metaplanet is able to do that, they're going to be biting their arms off to be able to invest in a 10% yield product, which changes the game. And because you're kind of attacking the market from the bottom, I'd say, versus this attention cycle, kind of getting retail investors in, you're kind of putting a siphon in the bottom of the fixed income market. It's going to be a lot more predictable in terms of flow, because every fixed income investor is going to be able to say, like, yeah, I'd like a 20x return on the fixed income that I'm investing in. And so that kind of changes the dynamic there. I love Brian's thoughts on that too. I know he lived in Japan, so I don't know if he agrees or disagrees.
Any of you guys want to chime in here and further on this graph, this model?
Oh, and then it's been interesting. I just did a simple, model. If you put $100,000 in, and Bitcoin's growing at 60% a year, and Simon, we hit his forward guidance of 400% Bitcoin yield. You're talking about, if you put $100,000 of Bitcoin in, $100,000 in, it's going to be $12 million over a 2-year period. So I just want to kind of put that number out there as just kind of a compounding math type of a number for people, just so they can kind of grasp what that means over a 2-year period.
So you're saying over a 2-year period, 100,000 invested in that scenario, which there's no guarantee would happen.
Right.
This theoretical scenario, that would grow to $12 million.
Sorry, actually, that's going to be $6 million. So $100,000, 60% annual price gain for Bitcoin, 400% Bitcoin yield for Metaplanet for 2 years is 6.4 million. And then I kind of had one that was a little bit higher, 600% Bitcoin yield, which is hopefully what they'll do, and kind of what Climb's models are suggesting. So to say that again, $100,000, 60% Bitcoin gain annually, and then 400% Bitcoin yield gets you $6.4 million if you invest $100,000 at a 1 MNAV.
Yeah. Any Climb or Brian, anything else you want to say to this? I mean, my takeaway here is, I think with the assumptions in the 4 different cases, I think a ballpark price of $100 per Metaplanet share is relatively realistic, and that's 6.5 years from now. And right now it's trading at 12.5, and that's a scenario that I like. I know, Climb, that's why it's the only stock you own right now, is because you're doing a lot of analysis and are running created these models and assumptions, and it's very attractive, very bullish. I mean, I gotta say, after during this show, I'm getting more bullish and wondering if I need to own more Metaplanet. What are you guys thinking?
Yeah, they are, to me, especially right now, in the Goldilocks zone as far as all these companies. So, Strategy already has almost 600,000 Bitcoin, so it's a different story. It's at a very different point in its sort of growth and everything. And its yield number, I think year to date, is 19%, and that's very admirable considering the Bitcoin they have on their balance sheet. Metaplanet's close to 300%. A lot of smaller companies, have much higher numbers as well. And if you start at a lower base, it's certainly easier to grow. The question is sustainability, and Metaplanet has the volume. They have all the regional advantages, being in Japan, where the interest rates are 0.5%, like Blake said, and they also have insane history of the 37 or 38 Bitcoin purchases over the last 14 or 15 months in a very, very clean sort of growth. Like, it's impressive. It kind of makes me think we're in a simulation. It's too perfect, right?
Yeah.
But then they still have enough growth, so you get to look at the rearview mirror in order to develop a plausible trajectory, I think. And then they still have the ability to 10x or 20x, or so, their Bitcoin per share. And that's really it. They're in that sweet spot where they have the growth and the history, and most other companies are either like all on one side or the other. Strategy is the only one that's kind of the other. It's not as much about growth anymore. Granted, in the future, providing 5% a year on top of Bitcoin's returns will be, I think, really, really admirable. And yeah, so they're just in that Goldilocks zone.
Certainly appears so. Brian, Blake, you have any comments on that? The Goldilocks zone, you're liking it? You liking it here?
I like it, yes. So, when I think about the investment case for something, I think there's, models are important, numbers are important, but I think fundamentally you need to be able to explain in a conceptual way what the investment case is.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that Metaplanet in particular has a set of circumstances going for it that no other company does or will, which is that it's in the home of the lowest interest rates in the world, the most yield-starved place in the world, a regulatory regime that probably will not change anytime soon, certainly a fiscal repressionary regime that's not going to change anytime soon. And I just, what all those conditions are present, the company is still not that big. I'm not sure what the market cap is after the price fluctuations, but we're still in the order of magnitude of, say, like 7 billion. There's a lot of room for the company to grow. The conditions are present that make it, very easy for it to grow. So, that's what it is.
And what Brian mentioned earlier, it's the model is it's an arbitrage where you've got a 60% Bitcoin yield return, and you're just giving the equity investors the upside potential with the stock, or the debt fixed income people, a piece of that particular 60%. So you can give them 2%, you can give them 5%, hypothetically, in a, thinking through scenarios, you can even offer them 30% to just get all that $10 trillion in relatively quickly and generate an extremely high yield, and kind of split that with them, if that makes sense. And why that's important to think through is, like, there's just a lot of room to run for Metaplanet, right? And so I think that's something to think through there. And currently they're obviously not offering anything fixed income right now, but it kind of shows you what the fixed income market would be receptive to, anywhere from 1% to 30%, returns for them would still be a smart business decision for Metaplanet. They don't need to do that, but it shows you what they could do. They could split the Bitcoin yield with the fixed income market, but they won't. But it's just interesting to think that through.
Absolutely. So we kind of covered all the topics that I had laid out beforehand. And Climb, thank you for your models and the that I could share and we could discuss here. Is there any other things that you think is going below the radar on Metaplanet right now? Something that excites you that we haven't spoken about, or just gut feeling, or anything you want to share? Also want to be respectful of your time. And while you think about it, let me say, it's almost like this hotel room I am in Prague. It's almost like it's a little bit Metaplanet artwork there on the wall behind me. I like it, like orange, kind of futuristic, very appropriate. Should do another Metaplanet roundtable from Prague. But and by the way, the ambition is to do this every Tuesday morning, 9 a.m. PST. But any other thoughts, something you guys want to share, some way of looking at this that you think is interesting that we should just discuss?
Blake, you want to go ahead? Did you have something?
Yeah, I got a first question. I guess it's to steel man our own arguments, but there's a lot of smart people that are still, let's say, in the MicroStrategy mindset. And I'd love to hear why, if we were to make the argument for or against Metaplanet and for MicroStrategy, just as two kind of examples. But, it's hard for me to not understand why more people from the MicroStrategy thought leader side aren't moving over to the Metaplanet side when you've got forward guidance of 10x what MicroStrategy is talking about. And I think the goal is to acquire more Bitcoin. So if that's your goal, you've got something that's generating forward guidance of 400% Bitcoin yield and one that's 30% Bitcoin yield forward guidance. And we can obviously talk about past performance, which I think is for Metaplanet around 500% and for MicroStrategy is around 80%. But I'd love to hear have that as a conversation. Like, why aren't smart people moving over from the MicroStrategy perspective to the Metaplanet or kind of these higher Bitcoin yield plays? Do you have any thoughts?
Yeah, what do you guys think, Climb and Brian?
Yeah. Go ahead.
Yeah. You go ahead, go first, Climb. I'll take it after you.
Okay. Yeah, I think every day more and more will, and so a lot of people that are still in strategy, and I think, like, I try to say as many times, even though I compare them a lot of times as well, like strategy, I still expect to beat Bitcoin, and that's the goal of all these companies. So as far as conservative plays, everyone's going to pick a different place on that sort of scale of, okay, this company came out yesterday and they're saying they can, 100x their Bitcoin per share. Should I invest in them? Right. So like that being like the most extreme thing, and then strategy being on the other end, the most conservative play. And, I try to actually make an argument that Metaplanet is the most conservative play due to, not relying as much on Bitcoin price returns, lower debt, and then all the regional advantages that I think they'll have with the low interest rate environment. But that's hard to. It's hard to argue. They've been around a little more than a year, but their execution is beautiful. But I do think that one really important thing is that every day that passes, every time they get more Bitcoin, a higher ratio compared to what compared to strategies, they're at like maybe 1.5% right now. Actually, now that I think they're closer to 2% with 10,000 Bitcoin. So as that continues and they have more history for people to appreciate, they become more conservative in the eyes of the typical strategy holder. So, I think that will probably help sustain that sort of perpetually higher MNAV that Metaplanet has. It's just sort of how I view it. That as they get larger, they may have less of the growth investors, but they'll have more of the strategy, style investors that come in.
Right. Makes sense. And I think that's a really interesting point, that it's not without the realms of possibilities that that Metaplanet can 100x the Bitcoin that they have, while for strategy that's impossible because that's 50 million, 60 million Bitcoin, and there's not 60 million. they maybe can 10x. However, also, of course, we have to remember that that while Metaplanet trades at a NAV premium MNAV above 9, then strategy is below 2 now. So there's that as well. But 100x the Bitcoin is a possibility for Metaplanet, and that's a pretty mind-blowing. Brian.
Yeah, I would say the first point I would raise is that I think Michael Saylor has deservedly earned a fair amount of loyalty with his shareholders. He's blazed the trail, and continues to blaze the trail. And the other thing I would say, we didn't really talk that much about the risks, but if you're concerned about capital preservation, what's the risk of a geopolitical event causing strategy price to fall to 50% versus Metaplanet to fall to 50%? If there's any kind of black swan event, it's gonna hit Metaplanet harder. It's a higher volatility stock. That's just the way it is. The upside,
Right.
the downside cut both ways. So there are trade-offs to being in high growth plays, and everybody should be wide-eyed about that. It's a different risk reward profile. So so long story short, one, Saylor, he's earned his loyalty, and two, different people are going to be attracted to different risk reward profiles.
Yeah, absolutely. And both stocks, as you said before, Climb, are very likely to outperform Bitcoin, even though there will be maybe 10, 15 years from now that MNAV is going to be less. Although if, as some of you agreed earlier on, the MNAV will end up plateauing out at around 2, because they will be valued both at the Bitcoin they have, but also a value assigned to the income they can generate from the Bitcoin they have on the balance sheet. Well, then strategy already is at the final MNAV of 1.9, or just below 2. So yeah, anyways, things are looking extremely bullish, and thank you for those model Climb. And I must say that you guys have managed to make me more bullish on Metaplanet during this stream, even though I'm the one inviting you and hosting it. But I'm bullish and loving it and having fun with this. So any final thoughts or comments before we end the show here? I mean, we could go for more time. It's up to you, but maybe we should do final words now, and then we.
I've got one more question if
Yep.
we've still got time.
Oh, I have time, so.
And I want to be conscious of Climb and Brian. But what do you guys think about the reflexivity of the Bitcoin yield? In other words, if people expect the highest Bitcoin yield company, they want to be a part of the highest Bitcoin yield company. Therefore, they get more investors, and that kind of creates that flywheel. Do you have any thoughts on that? Where, again, if a company has the highest by 10x, then most investors want to be in that company, and then that more of that money allows them to generate more yield. Any thoughts on that?
I definitely think that's a part of it. I think that I think it's Tad Smith is famous for saying that narrative is price, and there is a component of that where it's not only about execution, it's also about market perception of future execution, which then feeds back into actual ability to execute. So yeah, I mean, I definitely think that there's just the perception of high reflexivity feeding back into higher performance is definitely a thing.
Okay, cool.
Yeah, that makes sense to me. And I think now you're seeing a hierarchy. Some of the really tiny ones. I think I saw one this morning. I don't remember which one it was, but somebody was saying they're at like a 40 MNAV or close to like a 40. Maybe they have 100 Bitcoin or something. And I've sort of thought about this before. Like I call it 3 forces for MNAV. There's one that's like gravity that pulls everything down to 1 MNAV, and that's just the short sellers of the world and people that don't understand it. When the ETFs came out last year, a lot of people, I mean, none of us knew nearly as much as we do now about MNAV and how the premium works and why it works and all that. And it's still really just theory and a lot of guesswork and really just a lot of looking at history and what's happened. But yeah, we'll see what happens with Metaplanet. I think that Metaplanet, kind of has landed in that, 3 to 10 window, pretty deservedly so. And I think, there's realistic caps to that. There's, volume is one metric. If they're doing like an ATM style thing, I mean, you can only support what you can support with volume, selling into the market without crushing MNAV like you talked about earlier. But yeah, I mean, there's so many feedback loops, and then it's just a question of what frictions exist too. And like Brian said, it's a lot of belief and trust. I mean, it's really like people are just voting with their pocketbooks.
Yeah, amen. I can also slowly feel the jet lag kicking in a little bit. I got to Europe, was it Thursday, I think. So, and going from traveling 9 hours time zone from west to east, like west to east is always the worst. I'm starting to feel it, but I really thought we had a great show here. You guys had such great points and conversation. Thank you so much for being here all, Klein, Blake, and Brian. I really appreciate it. And I know there's 3,200 live viewers that also do. So this was awesome. I hope that you guys can make it back next Tuesday, 9 a.m. PST. If that doesn't work, we'll find some other time. The only thing that's tricky with that is if I'm in Denmark and the sun is shining and I go to Copenhagen Harbor and have fun and hang out, I got to be home by 6 p.m. and not be knocked out by the sun and fresh air. Let's put it that way. But really appreciate it, guys. It was great conversation, and thank you everyone for watching. Remember, it's not financial advice. We could be very wrong, but exciting conversation. It's financial entertainment information, and if you do like the financial entertainment, please feel free to hit the like button and subscribe. It's being streamed to both my X account, which you see right there at Anders_, and to my YouTube account. And the handles that you're seeing for each of these gentlemen is their X account, so you can find and follow them on X for a little bit of free speech analysis on Metaplanet and other good things. Thank you, guys. I hope you enjoyed it.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Thanks for the show.
All right. Cheers. Ending it here. Thank you for watching. If you are in Prague for BTC Prague, which starts tomorrow with Dev Hack Day, and then Thursday, Friday, Saturday, the BTC Prague conference, come say hi. Let's talk leveraged Bitcoin equities, or if we shouldn't call them leveraged Bitcoin equities, just Bitcoin treasury companies.
Parenthetic note on that. So Corey Clipston, the originator of the LBE term, is now saying that he questions whether or not he thinks it's the best marketing term, because he thinks it's great for institutional people who are used to LBOs, but for retail, perhaps we need to use BTCTCs, Bitcoin treasury companies. So something to think about.
BTCCs, yeah, BTCCs. I like that.
It's a little bit longer than I would like, but it is what it is.
What's your thoughts on that, Blake? You don't like the leverage thing? Feel it's a little bit negative connotation?
I'm just picturing my friends. I'm like, oh, it's a leverage Bitcoin thing, and they're like, okay, great. Yeah, no, I don't think so. I'm gonna stay away from whatever you're selling and whatever you're talking about versus it's a Bitcoin generating machine or something along those lines. So it's just a little bit of a marketing term. And then without people digging into it, they just say leverage Bitcoin, no thanks, versus no, this is a machine that's just generating Bitcoin and using consistent 10% leverage. So we'll figure out a term by next call, I'm sure.
Yeah, let's do that. Climb. Anything? Nope.
Yeah, no, I agree. It's not a very comfortable term, and especially when you look at something like Metaplanet, that I would, as I said, earlier, even if Bitcoin goes sideways the rest of this year, I would expect it to outperform, and that doesn't sound very leveraged to me. It's not like MTSU or X or something like that.
Yeah, fair enough. All right, well, we'll think about it. Maybe Corey can come up with something, or one of us does, or someone in the chat. This one also is not bad. I'm gonna put that on the screen right now from Onion Muck, Hot Money Treasury Companies. There you go. All right. Thank you, everyone. I hope you have a great, what day is it today? Tuesday, right? Great. Have a great Tuesday and a great week. And then we'll likely be here again next Tuesday, 9 a.m. PST, which is noon Eastern time. And that is 6 p.m. Central European time. All right. Thank you so much, Klein, Blake.